before I ask that, if there was an omission or something that you thought was going to be included in that wasn't included in, or in a different order, this would be the time you brought it up. So that doesn't have to happen tonight, but this is when you would do it. And you're completely free to make that motion. But if there's none, then can I get a mover and a seconder to approve the current agenda? By Wade, seconded by Aaron. Okay. And all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion carries. And can I get a motion to receive the minutes for our last meeting held on the 5th of May? And motion from Judy. Hold up, wait. Excellent. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion carries. I'll just be brief on a chair's report. Thanks for showing up this evening. It probably will become more difficult as we head into summer. So I thank you for giving up a few hours of your weekday and that your voice really matters to litmus test what we're hearing from the public as well as council through the surveys. So it really helps council out. So one of the things that we've got a bit of a Bible, and Leanne's not to fault on this. This is my fault too. I said, Leanne, make it all available for the committee. And she reluctantly did so. It's a heavy read, but it's everything that the town has contracted out for this 2 studies that normally accompany an official community plan. I've attached on the very last page of that telephone book, you'll see a page of questions for me. I think those questions would help really me understand your feedback, as well as I believe it will help council understand your feedback, which is important as well. Yeah.
I think I'm just missing everything past 270 on mine, which is fine. I can probably just look at the PDF. Unless I'm blind. That's okay. I can look at the PDF, it's fine.
Yeah, my at least on my copy, which seems to be fulsome, it's 319, which is on easy. You can just put it on the very back page. So I think my questions kind of capture a lot of what is in the study material, but yeah, it's a point that we can take on, and that's been included under new business. So I'm happy for us to carry on the discussion then. I think largely the discussion at council, and I know some folks were at it and might have tuned in, and council did receive the land economic use study as well as the housing needs. And I think the challenge for council was, while we've just had a lot of the town rezoned by the provincial legislation, which is 4 stories generally per lot, or 4 units per lot, and the transit-oriented development area at the hospital around 2 Hospital Way, but it extends beyond that up to 10 stories with no parking. So I think what council was concerned about, wow, that's a lot of rezoning. We didn't even do that much for the first OCP. Did people really know about that when they were thinking about adding more density in other areas? That was council's concern. So hopefully we dig into that a bit on our questions. And that's it for the report, except to say Bill 15 did pass. Council was opposed to that. So now anything that the province deems in the province's interest, meaning the government's interest, can be a decision by cabinet. They were referring to some examples being schools and hospitals to expedite things, but that also equally applies to housing. So if there's a 10-story going next to you and council and staff don't agree with it, cabinet can just decide that it's in the province's best interest and it goes ahead without any approval. Just so you know where we're sitting when it comes to the applicability of that legislation on us. It could apply to a mine as well, or something more significant. And that's it for report. We don't have any petitions and delegations, so I think we can cruise right down to reports, and that'll come. Who's driving tonight, Leanne? Is that you? Thank you.
Well, good evening, OCP Advisory Committee. Thank you for attending this evening. The first presentation is on the official community plan phase 1 process update. This report that you have in the agenda follows the meeting that Mayor Tobias referenced earlier in his chair report that occurred on May 13th. It's based on the feedback and comments that we received from council. Staff is going to be bringing forward a couple options on how to move forward with phase 1 of the OCP. So this presentation is informing the OCP Advisory Committee and also seeking any feedback, any comments that you wish to share with council next week. So as I noted, the purpose of this presentation is to provide the committee with an update on the official community plan phase 1 of the process. This diagram on this slide summarizes the OCP project that was approved by council last October. Phase 1 focuses on envisioning and guiding principles, land use, housing, and special planning areas. From February to April, the town led an inclusive and extensive engagement process to seek feedback from the public on the draft vision statement and goals and community growth and development. The What We Heard reports were presented to the OCP Advisory Committee on May 5th and are attached to the staff report for reference purposes. The town's consultant, Urban Systems, completed a land economics update study, as well as a housing capacity analysis and land use scenarios to provide an assessment of the community's ability to meet its estimated housing need for 2050, based on current and projected development trends, market conditions, and small-scale multi-unit housing provisions. Both reports were presented to council on May 13th, and they are also attached to the agenda. Following the housing capacity analysis, Urban Systems prepared 2 land use scenarios for the town's consideration. These scenarios and designations reflect initial feedback received from the residents through the surveys and open houses, past direction from council, town staff, the legislative requirements, existing market conditions and development activity, existing land use patterns, and infrastructure servicing capacity. So a lot went into drafting these 2 land use scenarios that were presented to council on May 13th. Staff also, in addition, staff presented these land use scenarios at the council meeting, and council did express some concerns just regarding the heights and densities being proposed for new urban centers and neighborhood villages and along the corridors. And it was also noted that that if the town only amends the land use designations concerning small-scale multi-unit housing and the transit-oriented area, that we would meet our 20-year housing need. And so there's really no need to amend any other aspects of the OCP, just because the provincial legislation that is in place will assist us in meeting the 20-year need, which is identified in our interim housing needs report. So based on that feedback that received, council requested that staff prepare a 3rd land use scenario, which would include the existing 2011 OCP land use designation map, with the only changes being the addition of the small-scale multi-unit housing and transit-oriented area designation to align with the provincial legislation. So in response to that feedback that staff received on May 13th, staff will be going back to Committee of the Whole in June, and we'll be presenting a report with options on how to move forward with phase 1 of the OCP project, just given the comments and concerns that were raised by council. And this slide here sort of informs the committee of the 3 options, proposed options that staff will bring forward for council's consideration. And there might be another option that might come up as well. So, but these are the 3 that through the discussions with council, what staff is bringing forward in June. So the first option is the basically it's that phase 1 OCP amendments comply with the provincial legislation only, and these changes would imply is that the existing residential and large lot residential land use designations are changed to a small scale multi-unit housing designation to align with the zoning that the town completed last year to align with the provincial legislation. We would also establish a new transit-oriented area designation and neighborhood village designation to also satisfy the Bill 47, the provincial legislation. We would update any relevant policies to ensure consistency with the provincial legislation. We would still move forward with updating the vision statement and goals and refine any existing land use and housing policies in the 2011 OCP. So this would be option 1. The key takeaways for this option are all other land use options would, that should actually say designations, not options. All other land use designations would remain the same. So all the uses and heights and densities that are in our, that are currently defined in our land use designations in the OCP would remain the same. The original scope of work would be revised. The focus on updating housing need in 2050 would not be completed other than to align with the 20-year housing need. There would be no further public engagement on land use designations except for a public hearing during the bylaw adoption process, and the 50% draft would be brought forward at a later date. Option 2, which would be the OCP amendments to comply with the provincial legislation, as well as review the land use designations along Western Gateway Corridor and the lands that are currently designated town center. And so we would carry out the specific changes that are outlined in option 1. We would review and update the land use designations for the properties along the Western Gateway, as well as consider extending the Western Gateway corridor from the intersection of Island Highway and Burnside Road west to the Colwood border, as this has come up in the past, as well as revisit the location and designation of the town center in the 2011 OCP, which is also something that has come up in the past as well. The key takeaways for this one is all other land use designations would remain the same. So there'll be no other changes to any of the other land use designations in the 2011 OCP. Again, the original scope would change where we wouldn't focus on housing needs 2050. It would just be to align with the 20-year housing need. We would have engagement on the Western Gateway Corridor, the town center, the updated vision and goals, and any relevant land use and housing policy. And then the 50% draft for phase 1 would be brought forward at a later date for the OCP Advisory Committee's review and councils. And then option 3 is basically continuing on with the original scope of work and deliverables that were originally approved for the OCP for phase 1. But because of where we are in terms of timing and the provincial deadline to update our OCP to align with the provincial housing legislation by December 31st of this year, we are going to have to decouple phase 1. So bring forward a bylaw to deal with the amendments to the OCP to align with our 20-year housing need, and then we continue on with phase 1. So we would finalize and promote the vision and land use survey, which my colleague Mr. Scory will be presenting on after this presentation. We would organize open houses, pop-ups, and other forms of public engagement to gather feedback from the public on the draft vision statement and goals and the 3 draft land use scenarios that have been requested by council, and then complete a comprehensive review and update of the land use and housing policies in 2011. So basically it would, option 3 just will be continuing on with the process, with the project scope that was originally approved. And, but then understanding that we would have to bring forward separate amendments sooner than later to deal with the provincial legislation. And these 3 slides, so these are the draft land use scenarios, and I just wanted to include them in this slideshow because they might be a bit hard to read in the hard copy and perhaps in the digital copy. So they are here in the presentation, and I just wanted to share them with you. I did speak to them. Unfortunately, they weren't all prepared for our last meeting on May 5th, but they were presented to council on May 13th, and then now they're here just for you to see. And so land use scenario option 1 is again this. So these, so this introduces some new land use designations, and option 2 is the other land use scenario that was prepared by Urban Systems, and introduces the new land use designations, and then this is the third option that has been prepared in response to council's request. And this is the 2011 OCP, and the only 2 changes here are the all the yellow parcels. Those used to be the residential and large residential land use designations, and now they would change to the small scale multi-unit housing designation, which would allow up to 6 units depending on where the parcel is within the town and if it's near frequent transit service. The other designation is the transit-oriented designation, and neighborhood village, which is up by the hospital area, and that forms part of the transit-oriented area that was prescribed by the province. So the key takeaways for option 3 is that staff would continue to work within the scope and budget of the project presented in the RFP, and additional engagement would occur, and a 50% draft would be brought forward in the future. The impacts and implications of this that staff wish to note are that there's been considerable amount of time, budget, and resources that have been allocated to this project. And it's just important to inform the public that if there's any changes in scope in terms of moving forward, it's important that we inform the public and communicate how any future feedback will be used to inform the OCP. That's the end of my presentation. And again, I am happy to take questions or comments and anything that you wish to share with the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. And this could come out as we receive it for information, or it could also be we provide a recommendation to council on pursuing one of these, or it's the committee's opinion. If we could, Leanne, it's really important for me, even though as a committee, if we're recommending to council, of course, it goes ahead with a majority rules. But for me, it's somebody who dissents with an opinion as well. If we could record why in our minutes, like Wade didn't like option 3, because I think those things also have value for council and the public, just to not only show that the committee voted a certain way, but somebody didn't agree with the committee's saying. I think that has value too. So this is where we open it up for general discussion about the staff report. If anybody has comments about it or questions, or would like to explore one option over the other. Go ahead.
So my understanding is, if I could just reiterate, I think what my understanding is we had the results of this survey, and then at the council meeting, council decided that potentially, or it was seen as an issue that maybe the public doesn't understand the provincial legislation. So maybe the survey that we've discussed, and I guess council decided to put out to the public, people weren't informed enough. So now we might just do the bare minimum of what the provincial legislation is and just throw all of this in the garbage? Is that my understanding, or? That's
No,
one of the options, right? That's option
I
one.
think that's probably one of the options was, does the public understand when they're walking down the street that where they're looking at single homes now, they're going, or there's,
Could be.
could be 4 to 6
Mhm.
plus
Uh-huh. Transit ordinance.
a corridor plan, so essentially 6-story apartment buildings all the way down Island Highway.
Is that part of the? Is that's not?
That was one of
COD?
the options with the corridor plan,
That was
plus
option
the
two.
FMU,
Yeah, so
plus
the provincial
POA.
legislation plus the corridor.
Yeah.
Is another option, or then the third option is just continuing with what we've been doing, assuming that the public, when they're putting up to 10 stories, that they might have a clue about the provincial legislation that is outlined in this survey to begin with, right? Like as people go through, they were informed about there was a section, correct?
If you can, Leanne, that'd be great. I'm sorting out something else.
As part of the, and Sterling, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as part of the community growth survey that everyone completed, there was background information on small scale multi-unit housing and transit oriented development as part of a backgrounder that was attached to the original survey. So people had the opportunity to read that information before they filled it out, completed the survey. And Sterling, correct me if please let me know if I misspoke or if there's any additional information that the committee should know about this.
Yeah, that's right. And as part of the workshops and open houses, there was also the same information shared at those as well.
Okay. I don't think I need more clarification. I'm firmly for option 3 of continuing on. I see it as a disservice to the process and what the OCP encompasses is not just housing. There's active transportation, there's economic development, there's connected communities. A lot of the comments in here that I've taken considerable amount of time of reading 380 pages that support many things that are not just housing, but there is broad support for increased density outside of what the provincial legislation forces. So I don't really, I know I missed that council meeting. I don't know all the discussion, but I'm frankly quite disappointed. I think that I don't understand, but I'm firmly for option 3.
Thanks. And just to be clear, for the other parts not associated with housing, those, I think the intent was still to continue that part of the OCP development. It was just around the land use decision and the mapping, essentially. Leanne, can you clarify?
Yeah, this is just speaking to phase 1. So the housing, the land use, and the special planning areas, the one being the Western Corridor, Gateway Corridor. Phase 2, which looks at the other aspects of the OCP, like our parks and recreation, transportation, infrastructure, our community well-being, that will be part of phase 2. And so that's separate, but yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that even though they're separate in different phases, that limiting the first phase kneecaps anything else that to be done to address those things. So you need density to have many of the things that people want. So that's my.
No, that's good. That's good. Those are good thoughts. Any other thoughts from the committee on feedback on any options? Go ahead.
Maybe this is off topic right now, but when I've talked to my neighbors, because of the place I live up on Highland Road, we're not impacted by 6-story building, but we see them in the distance. Lots of them around the hospital and Burnside and Helpskin. And the question my neighbors always ask me when we talk about this is, what's the implication for me? How is it going to affect my taxes? How is it going to affect my transportation? How is it going to affect my lifestyle? And when I look at the 3 options, would they all be the same or not? They wouldn't. So unless we can really get some kind of a guesstimate of this is going to cause the taxes to go up, this is going to cause the tax to go down, this means the traffic is going to get horrendous. It's really tough to say and be able to go back to my neighbors and justify, I think we should go push ahead with option 3. And I do think we should, but I've got to answer to them a little bit, not as much as the council does, but that is the question that's asked all the time.
Yeah, and I think the great points, and I think depending on where you live and whether it changes or whether you're identified in one of those change areas is probably going to impact your response one way or another. This, the blobs that we'll call it for planning that goes into it, eventually equates to zoning in purpose and intent. The uptake, as Leanne will point out on, okay, so we rezone things for small scale multi-unit housing in accordance with the legislation for most of View Royal. The same with the transit-oriented development area by the hospital and the other 6-story. Somebody may never build that, right? It may look, we could be here in 10 years and not a damn thing has been built in View Royal, right? That's truth. The other thing that can happen is that an area we didn't designate into the OCP, somebody comes up with a great idea and said, we planned this wonderful thing out, let's put it here. And does council agree to build it and modify the OCP or amend the OCP as part of the process of putting that thing in? That's entirely possible, and that has happened as well. So it's not all science when it comes to what's going to be built and what's not going to be built. Is it streamlined enough? Well, I think the government's making sure it's streamlined enough to be built out. But is there developer interest, and where is that interest? For a while, it was apartment buildings, not so much condos right now because we've got, I guess, kind of a glut. And we've seen one uptake for small scale multi-unit housing in View Royal in the past 6 months, but who knows if that will change over time as well. So it's not just the planning, it's then the zoning, and then even if I do that, will somebody build on it? And I just want to remind everybody, including myself, that if somebody wants to come in on a portion that's got a single family home on it, even though it's zoned for small scale multi-unit housing, and wants to put up another single residence, they can do that, right? There's nothing preventing them from doing that. So it depends on the uptake, I guess, as well as the planning and zoning. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I want to reiterate, I think what Aaron said is exactly how I feel. So it feels terribly inefficient to say that we believe that these areas could develop into the zoning that we expect them to, but we would need council to approve those for every single development that would go in. Seems like it makes way more sense for us to say, like, here's some great uses for these zones. And if developers want to come in and build them that way, that's great. And if we need to, we can have council amend the things later that they don't like, as opposed to having to approve every single one that we do like.
And normally that comes in whether the OCP is requiring a or requiring a amendment or not. Got to get my language right, Leanne, so correct me if I slip out. And then once it's zoned that way, correct. If they want to go in there and have that structure in accordance with that zoning, and just as long as the other hiccup they might have if that plan doesn't require any variances, right? If they're not being subscriptive to the OCP or our building parameters on that. If it adjusts, then it will equate to more time, of course, as well. Any other thoughts, questions? Go ahead, Linda.
I agree exactly with what you've said. I don't really think it matters what we say. If the money's not out there and the developers aren't interested, nothing's going to get built. I have a question. What's a 50% draft? Sorry.
It's I would call it a sort of the first draft of the OCP. So it's yeah, it will come forward with wherever the town lands with a draft land use map and designations and policies. It will be brought forward for the committee's review.
The transportation hub, and I live fairly close to the hospital. The transportation hub at the hospital is, to me, a case is if you build it, they will come. If we get that transportation hub there, then BC Transit can bring more buses there. And a big problem is transportation and that, but if we have that started, then maybe we can improve on what we've got. But if we don't start it, that's not going to happen. And there's certainly a lot of development going in around that area. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Last chance on this topic. Now, does anybody want to come up with a recommendation? Sure, please.
Further in, we're talking about the surveys yet. You showed the option maps, the 3 option maps. And I think that is really important to use those to help the public understand what the implications are. I think there are some improvements needed in terms of labeling, because we're talking about transport-oriented areas, which I first understood to be a 400-meter circle based on bus stops. And then when you're labeling corridors, and there are about 6 or 7 of them that you're asking us to rank, does that mean that we're not dealing with transport-oriented orbits, circles anymore, but it'll be more aligned along the corridors? And so that's also that's an option. Okay. Just for clarification, so that's connected with a particular option that you're suggesting?
So the 3 land use, the 3 draft land use scenarios that are in the package, option 1 and option 2 were prepared by our consultants, Urban Systems, which reflect the community feedback and council staff and council comments, studies, a variety of information went in to produce those maps, and those two options are introducing a corridor land use designation, the urban center designation, the neighborhood village designation, as well as a transit-oriented area designation. So both of those 2 options. Option 3 is the one where it's the existing 2011 OCP, and we're just introducing the transit-oriented area and designations, as well as the small-scale multi-unit housing designation. The corridor designation that you see in option 1 and 2 are not in option 3.
I think that needs to be made really clear when the survey is going out to people that, this option has this criteria.
Yes.
Sorry, Lynn, this was confusing me earlier, and I thought it was clarified, but now I'm confused again. So scenarios 1, 2, and 3 are part of option 3, as was just discussed. Option 1 and 2, option 1 and 2 are scenario 3 equivalent, essentially.
That is correct. You're absolutely, you're correct. So the option, so option 1 is land use scenario option 3. And for option 2, it would be the land use scenario option 3, plus potentially we'll look at the Western Gateway Corridor as well. And
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Did anybody want to raise a recommendation to council for it?
Can I raise recommendation that we go with option 3?
You can. And now what would happen is there'd be some discussion about the merits of option 3 over 1 and 2. Right? So because you moved it, you need a seconder to second option 3.
Seconded.
Second, good. And now how it works is you get to motivate others on why option 3 is better than 1 and 2.
Okay. I'm not a politician, so I'm just going to wing it here. But I think that at least at the initial meeting, it was proposed that this committee was formed and that the OCP was being relooked at by the new council in an effort to get more feedback about the direction of the town. We've gotten some feedback. It's, to me, it's people are open to density. People were informed about the provincial legislation if they had not already read about it or heard about it from their neighbors. And I don't understand why we would throw another $71,000 in the garbage of the town's money. I don't know how much the former OCP cost, but I'm guessing something around the same amount of time. There's a lot of engagement. There was engagement. I know I attended some of it. Why we would discontinue doing that. The ideas in this document, the things people want in their life, the better recreation, the access to nature, the less traffic and traffic mitigating things, and better transit and better active transportation and more economic opportunity and more commercial spaces and more little neighborhood are all supported by density. I do not understand why we would do the bare minimum, knowing that the SSMU is very low uptake. That's been, I mean, Victoria passed it quite a ways before, and it's still very, very low. That will not meet our needs. I just, from the economics of development, 6 stories is what I'm hearing is more viable. The small scale multi-units will probably be like multifamilies who can afford to redevelop their land. The transit oriented development, that's great. That's going to serve that one community. If developers do come in and build their 10 stories there, that's going to have a nice little area where everyone can walk to where they are. They're probably going to be an increased bus, but the rest of the communities are completely left out. It doesn't make any sense to me. We're already, from a generational standpoint, we're failing the younger generations already by not having met the housing needs for decades. Why would we do the bare minimum at this point? I think it's extremely likely that future governments will also be pressuring municipalities to continue to densify, especially with the city, especially with climate change concerns, housing affordability concerns. We don't control immigration. We don't know what's going to happen there. Why not zone for more where you want it instead of leaving it open for a higher level of government to tell you where to put it? If we rely on spot rezonings, which is possible, it's possible we zone all sorts of things and then someone comes for a spot rezoning, it drags out the process. It includes more of your council's time where they could be focused on other things. And it adds cost to the cost of that housing at the end of the day. The whole point is that OCP has as many people giving their opinion about where things should go versus spot rezoning where you get the handful of neighbors who are opposed to it. I don't understand why we wouldn't go forward with this. We've already, yeah. So that's my terrible version of a.
No, that's good. And for the rest of the OCP will still be completed about, everything else except the plan. So we're really talking about the difference between land use and what we want the town to be in 50 years. Now you're the seconder, you also get to motivate. You could just say same, or you've got your own words to.
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think Aaron was very clear. I guess just will say one more time that it seems terribly inefficient to expect that we will just spot rezone things that we like as opposed to say this is a great use for this land. So.
Yeah, I think when council this happened and there was an election and I get elected and a lot of it wasn't around really the question of the density along the corridor. It was the impact on the rest of the community, right? And it's not, it went beyond not in my backyard. This is a 6-story structure that's going in front of a residential community that's single story or a strata that they can't see the sun after 3 o'clock each day. And I think what it boils down to is what council and I have both asked for is to visualize those streets in the future, right? It's easy to drive down sections now and see what they look like, but it's harder when you look to the future. What's this street going to look like? Will it have enough things around it that support a complete community? And I think that was the concern the first time that there was an election up. It was that, do we need to go to 6 stories, right? And let's say over 3 lots, increase the density by 8 times, or is it okay to go to 4 units a lot, which is still more than double what it is now? From my own perspective, is are we giving people a place to live with all of this building? And is it having an impact on cost? Right now, at the cheapest new townhouse that I've seen being built in planning is $880,000 for a townhouse in View Royal. The average rent is, if you're paying it and even have a good job, you're not saving to buy that $880,000 townhouse. So it depends what the town wants to be when it grows up. Do we want to be a place of mixed? Do we want to be a place to raise families? What is it we want to be when we grow up, I think, in this planning? So there's a lot to do with these land use blobs that go around outside of it. And we also have to be cognizant of about the fact that whether people have chosen a YIMBY or a NIMBY stance, I don't believe in that at all. When I was elected, I thought everybody in the town is really a shareholder. They pay taxes. They pay to enjoy this town. At what point is it that we can get development? Development was easy in some cases. There were areas that weren't developed. Greenfield, nobody complaining about new development coming on. Chilco is a lot like that, and as it stretches out. My neck of the woods in North Helmkin was, I would say, underdeveloped. Council made a good decision at the time. There was a Home Depot. That was where Langford's Home Depot was supposed to go, Eagle Creek. They turned it down at the time. And everybody said, you're crazy. You know, this is going to be great for the community. And I think by holding out a little bit, they got exactly what they wanted, that they didn't know they needed in the first place. So I'm mixed on this. I get the density. Where I get rapid development right now and high uptake are 6-story purpose-built market rentals. And that's what's being built, but they're not getting filled up. They're not getting filled up to the extent that I thought. And it's mainly to do with the cost. Maybe the cost will come down if we build more of them. But the other thing I do know is View Royal does not have to solve the province's housing challenges just by its own municipality. The province gave us directives to pass, and we passed them for zoning. And now the whole purpose of this OCP will actually codify those in our zoning, right? So whatever we want to do over and above that, I think are good ideas, but is it where the town wants to put it, knowing that we'll still have a space to grow? So we've got a mover and a seconder for option number 3. And Leanne, can you read out option number 3?
So option 3 would be phase 1 OCP amendments to comply with the provincial legislation and continue with the original project scope of work and deliverables for phase 1. So that would be for option 3. So carry on as with the original project scope that was approved by council.
Okay, I'm not going to support this one because I don't think we've got, number one, enough community support behind it right now. It's based on some community input, but I think the community has not had a look at those maps yet, correct?
That would be through the survey. So, so option 3 would include that the vision and land use scenario survey that Sterling will be presenting. So that will be the opportunity that we go out to the public. So the land use scenarios that have been prepared is in response to the surveys and other public engagement that we've done. These have been drafted, and then the next survey would be to present these and get feedback from the community as well as open houses and
everything else. No, I would be happy, I think, at the end of that, depending on what we find from support to in the town, if that was what the majority of the town's will was, I'd be willing to recognize that, as long as there was a balanced understanding and not in a backgrounder that this is what is required for us to pass by housing legislation, and this what it means to potential density, capacity, and not build out. And then I would be supportive of it. But go ahead, Leanne.
So the next item on the agenda is the vision and land use survey. So Sterling will present that, and it provides so hopefully the committee's had an opportunity to review it, because it provides sort of the context and things, and we're obviously looking for the committee's input as well before we move forward with the survey, if council approves that direction.
Okay. Perfect. So we got a motion on the table. Does anybody else want to speak to it one way or another? Go ahead, Jerry, and I'll go to you.
Yeah, briefly, I think council's struggle was envisioning a canyon, canyons that we would drive through or ride through along our major corridors of 6-story buildings, flanking the road, flanking the pathways, which was a daunting prospect to consider for the town. I don't believe I think those kinds of concerns were more in the core and the already residential areas between the hospital area and down to the center of town. But there was comfort for higher density, higher buildings at the Western Gateway, and I would think even if this didn't actually come up, Sid, but I would think stretches of the Island Highway, but not all of them. For example, across and beside the fire hall, that stretch, that kind of, it's a bit of a no man's land now anyway. So I believe there would be selective comfort, but not a canyon that that encompasses all of the corridor as represented within the maps. However, I am going to support this because we've asked members of the public to come and discuss this and give their opinions and represent what matters to people who are not on council, and that's most of the community. So I will support Aaron's motion.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm going to go to Mike first and back to you.
That's a procedural question. You're asking this committee to make a recommendation on which option is generally preferred, and yet we're going to have a large-scale survey of the population that is going to ask that question again. And
Yeah, just for your feedback, because these minutes will go to council. Like, it's helpful for council to say what was the debate about and what did the committee think?
right, and so the public survey results will still matter. Okay, thank you.
But we would only see the public survey if we went with option 3. If we go with option 1 or 2, the survey will not go out to the public. So this is, I think, the confusing thing about the scenarios versus the options.
Do we, by not having 3 in there, we wouldn't do a survey?
not the survey that's coming forward. No, because the survey, the vision and land use survey is based on the three land use scenarios that were presented and will be presented to council next week. So option one will have no further public engagement because that's just doing the bare minimum of meeting housing legislation. So there's no point in going out to the public and ask when it's already mandated by the province. There would be a public hearing because we have to do a public hearing, but that's it. Option two, we would probably have a dialed down survey just that would focus on the Western corridor and potentially questions around the town center, but that's it. And but then the survey that we've brought forward is because council asked us to bring it back to at the next council meeting. Pardon me. Council asked staff to bring back to the survey back to the May 20th meeting for discussion, but we just didn't have enough time in terms of the turnaround time. So we're bringing forward the draft survey in June at the committee of the whole. So we're doing that, but that pertains to option three.
I would find it valuable to put all three options in front of the public, to be honest with you.
So yeah, and that could be a motion. So we have the survey already takes into account option one because it's the bare minimum. That's land use scenario option three. We could create a fourth scenario, which is option one plus the Western Gateway corridor, or we just hear what the public has to say.
Yeah, I think that would be great. But specifically to the motion for Aaron's, the motion on the table is for option three. So everybody knows now that it's still going to go to the public regardless of the options. Any other discussion on it? Go ahead.
I also support Aaron's motion, particularly along those corridors. A lot of the properties right now are quite old. And if we don't have the zoning to support either increased density or structures that might, better facilitate our community, we're going to see over probably the next decade, would be my assumption, new builds that don't really have that. And then you're going to be stuck with those new properties for X amount of years before any redevelopment could ever occur. If you just take a look at a lot of the properties in View Row, and this is just my opinion, it's time for a lot of them to go over the next few years. It's just not economic to maintain them. And we have a really unique opportunity to, I think, make a very large difference, particularly if we have the proper zoning and we encourage people to build the right things. There was a comment earlier saying that perhaps the council shouldn't have full, maybe I'm not wording this right, but basically I think the council should have some level of control for builds, particularly along our corridors, because we don't want to just open the floodgates up to developers, just build whatever they want. I think having the ability to control it to some level is valuable. Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think Aaron's motion is good.
Good. Any other discussion? So now what I'll ask is all in favor of Aaron's motion was for option three. You can raise your hand. Anybody opposed, just keep it down. And those, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and all those opposed to option three. Well, that's, and you're abstaining? Abstentions go in the negative, so we're deadlocked, I think. You're not voting for? You're not voting against? Yeah.
My apologies. Who is the one who put it at a deadlock?
Mike. Okay, then it's in favor, so it passes. So good work. That's a recommendation to council that it's option three and that there were 1, 2, 3 opposing views. Thanks, Leanne. And Sterling, I think you're up with the draft revision.
Thank you, Mayor Tobias. I don't have a presentation tonight. I will just do a brief kind of ramble here of an introduction, and then we can get into a review. So the purpose of the report was very brief, was a page long, was just for the community to have an opportunity to review the draft vision and land use survey. It was, as Leanne said, a bit of a pivot from what we were hoping to do a few weeks ago. We were hoping to do a launch of the survey, but following that discussion from council at the May 13th meeting, we've now had an opportunity to review as a committee this draft survey, and staff will be taking this vision and land use survey to the committee of the whole meeting next Tuesday for council's review as well. The recommendation for tonight for this specific agenda item is that the committee review and provide comments on the draft official community plan review update, draft vision, and land use survey, and that these comments be considered and incorporated into the draft survey to be presented to the committee of the whole in June. So really, this is an opportunity for this committee to get into the weeds and provide comment on the survey, provide suggestions, provide edits. It's kind of a working session. What I know worked quite well, Mayor Tobias, at a couple of the past call it working sessions that we had, was we did a bit of a round table. So each member of the committee, maybe section by section, we can go and speak to things that they'd like to see changed or clarification on. Before we do that, though, I can just speak to the survey a bit. The survey is based on what we've heard to date. So the committee may recall that we went to the public back in January and conducted a vision and guiding principle survey. The second kind of engagement touch point was in March to April, where we did a community growth survey. So this is an opportunity to revisit the results of both those surveys and really ask the public, did we get it right? There's a section then on the vision statement, draft vision statements. There's 3 of them, and 11 draft vision goals. And the questions that we ask in the survey are much to the degree of, did we get it right, or are there suggestions for improvement? And then, as Leanne summarized in her presentation, we have 3 I'll call it growth scenarios, land use scenarios in this survey. And in each of those, we are asking, or would be asking, the public what they like about the locations, the uses, the heights. You'll notice that there's a few exceptions, and where those come into play is where the province has designated land use or zoning. So for instance, we can't ask about the height of the TOA, transit oriented area, because it's already been designated through provincial legislation. There's no way we can change the minimum. Just as it's the same for SMA, so small scale multi-unit housing. Where we do have a lot of flexibility is in some new concepts, which we're trying to explore, which is the Western Gateway Employment District Corridor. That's a brand new draft designation at this point that has had quite a bit of interest through the community growth survey from members of council. Some familiar, I'll call it familiar terms and concepts that are maybe expanded on from our existing OCP are the community corridors. We already have community corridors as a community development and growth concept, and you'll see them kind of expanded on here, again, based on what we heard in the community growth survey. And when I say the community growth survey, I also do want to point out that I'm also taking into consideration what we heard at our open houses, our online and in-person workshops, where there was a lot of feedback that went into the draft land use scenarios that Leanne spoke about. And yeah, this is kind of an opportunity to go back to the public and, like I said, really ask the big question of, did we get it right? And if we didn't, understand why we didn't or what could be improved. The only other thing I was going to say with this survey was that we were hoping to, as part of this, the launch of this survey, is do much like what we did for engagement week 1. So some type of open house events and pop-ups in the community to get people involved and doing this survey. We saw an uptake in the number of completions of our second survey versus the first, which is great. And we were hoping to kind of continue on that with that momentum leading into the survey. So there was a presentation at the May 13th council meeting that I gave just a brief overview of what engagement we were planning to do. If you guys have any questions, we can discuss. But I think with that said, Mayor Tobias, if we could, maybe get into a bit of a discussion on this survey, that would be great. And Leanne, do you have anything? No? Okay.
Yeah, the only one I'd start before I passed around the committee is there anywhere in there that we touched on type of housing, meaning diverse housing, specifically co-ops?
I don't think we get into that level of detail in terms of like saying, do you want X type of housing? When we're talking about land use designations, we're talking a bit higher level, but
I think it would help because people see 6 stories and see market rental.
there is in the land use designations section. It would be on page. So starting on page 10, we have the land use designations, and underneath I think the ground oriented designation, I think there's specific mention of co-ops.
If you could just make a note of that, Sterling, just tease it out as a separate question. Like, would you encourage more co-op housing in View Royal? And the reason I bring that up, folks, is that they're probably some of our most successful housing models, and they are affordable. Some of our co-ops now have even come to us and say, hey, can we change things around and make it, because you've got a family being raised, fast forward 25 years, mom's still there, kids are gone, and she's living in a 3-bedroom, and they would love to have an option for a granny suite or that 1-bedroom that she could move to and then free that up, but there's just not that diversity in the design. So it's just, there's a part of me that says we're not doing enough, and it's what one time was easier to build them with CMHC grants and whatnot to get it on the go, but it's just disappeared for, I guess, reasons of profitability. And would like to know if the community would support more co-op, because we don't ask that. And I realize this is about land use, but I think it's an important OCP question. Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, so so the way the survey is structured is so before we get into the nitty-gritty of the questions, we've defined the different land use scenarios, different land use designations, where we list out sort of the proposed uses. So for example, the small scale multi-unit housing designation, the proposed uses would be like detached and attached dwelling forms, including detached residential, duplexes, secondary suites, garden suites, row houses, townhouses, houseplexes, and apartment developments. And we could add in housing co-op as a use, but because we're not really sort of
Perfect.
asking questions like each separate use, but if we can make sure that we include housing co-op as a use that it would be supported under this designation, would that respond to your comment?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thank you.
Terry.
Continuing on that theme, could we do something similar with, since the government is mandating our housing levels and giving us our directions. Can we add in one of the designations, can we add government government subsidized housing? Because much of the reason that, all of these units are being built, but they're not filling up because they're just too expensive. So we're not really solving, the housing crises for a lot of people. So is there a way of adding, is there a place where we could put government subsidized, supportive housing?
Yeah, actually, that would be part of more of our policies in
Okay.
the OCP, in the housing and land use sections of the OCP, where we get into sort of refined policy that will hopefully translate into action. So in terms of building more or encouraging below market housing in our community and supportive housing, if that is something that the community and council would like to see. We and then also as part of inclusionary housing and inclusionary zoning, there's an opportunity to ask for or to require below market housing as part of that. But we when we bring forward the policies, land use and housing policies, we can speak to that. In terms of the land use designations, it's more a bit higher level, like in terms of apartment or townhouse, doesn't really get into the tenure of the housing.
Got it. Thank you.
So we can follow that up in a survey later on when we get to phase 2.
Oh,
Types of
absolutely.
other feedback. Might as well go all around the room. Start with you, Linda. Judy, sorry. Okay, all right,
And by the time it gets over to these guys, it's hashed out, so.
all right. Who wants to go first? It's probably safer for me to ask that. Mike, you're up.
A few things. Up front, I think we need to have definitions. There are TOA, SS, MHU, FSR, all of the planners speak shorthand, needs to be upfront and explained for people that are doing surveys so that they understand what they're agreeing to. And that's a question of definitions. I think I know the maps are vitally important, especially when you're talking about the 3 different options. And it was very difficult to have them grouped all in the beginning and try to go through the questionnaire and then go back and try to figure out which color blob is the one that I really need to look at. And so if the maps can lead the section on option 1 and the section on option 2 and option 3, I think it makes it easier to find, and because the survey is dense and there's a lot of heavy lifting that people are going to have to do to complete it, and for us to get relevant information. Some of the things that we were asked to support or not support are corridors or neighborhood zones that were labeled, but I couldn't see that they were clear enough on the maps to indicate where is Helmcken Harbor, where is this or that. Okay. So that's a labeling issue that I thought if you're going to ask people to support something, they need to know exactly where it is. And sort of following along with what Tom was saying and talking with his neighbors is that people need to know what is my street, what's my neighborhood going to look like if I agree to this, as opposed to agreeing to that. And that's why the mapping is really, really important. I also think somewhat related to this is that open houses and pop-ups are very important, and it's incumbent on us as members of the advisory committee to go to those things and engage in conversations and listen to what people have to say, and so we can get a clear understanding of where they're coming from when they're putting this colored dot here or there. And so that's part of the work that we have to do still is to ramp up our engagement with anybody that has an opinion about the developing OCP.
I could just add to that and just say probably the most important thing is get people to those workshops and fill out surveys, then to also be there to listen to what they have to say. But yeah, the more people we can get to them, the better. Erin?
I only have one comment. Maybe it's similar to Mike's here, but I think that for me, if I'm a option 1 person, I have to still click through all of option 2 and 3. Like, do I have to fill out those, or is there a way of bypassing it? Like, once you pick.
So this is this is an interesting kind of I think decision point for this committee. To answer your question, they would still go through all of the rest of the survey. What the project team kind of waffled back and forth with was, do we use logic and say, okay, if somebody says they prefer option X, they don't do the rest of the survey. However, there might be elements of the other options that respondents may still want to look at and provide input on. So if this is a discussion point that the committee wants to talk about further, absolutely, we can add in logic and we can make it so somebody, if they knew within 30 seconds of looking at the 3 options, they knew option 1 and 2 or option 3, whatever they wanted to pick was their option that they wanted to go with, the survey could be a lot shorter, but we might also miss out on some feedback from respondents. The other thing we might want to think about as a potential for influence is that this survey is not restricted, so anybody can fill out the survey. We did see at some of the open houses, some I'll call repeat customers, so people coming and putting in multiple dots throughout multiple events, just as we saw some repeat customers with our online survey. And we know this just because we can see at a very high level, generally IP address and postal code. Now, that's not to say that maybe multiple people in a household were doing it as a family project, who knows? But where I'm going with this is that if we choose to register, have participants register, we might also see a decline because it takes additional steps to do that. If we don't, we may see multiple people saying, no, they don't like this option, and they might spam that option. So another thing for the committee to discuss. The feedback that we've got so far, though, it's great. We're writing lots of notes, and I think all totally accommodated can be accommodated with some revisions to the survey. Yep.
Anything there? Turing.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I appreciate the images in here, so people can visualize what a TOA might look like. But and to Mike's point, defining what a TOA is, especially in FSR, and there are still members of council that just say, what does that look like? What does an FSR mean to me in my life? How many units is that? How much land is left outside? And a 4.5 FSR versus a 1.5 FSR. One is much more livable than the other, but what does it look like? So if we could address FSRs from for the public particularly.
Mayor Tobias, what I think would be beneficial for the team would be to understand the preference for where that information would come in. We might recall as a way to handle this in the past, we provided the backgrounder documents to provide definitions and kind of a 101 for respondents. I'm getting the sense that might not be the direction we want to go now, and maybe some clarification if we want to see definitions and more images and more detail built right into the survey. The only thing I'll say with that is that it'll increase the survey length, but if the committee feels that that would be better for respondents to understand important concepts, terms, et cetera, then yes, we can absolutely build that right into the survey.
I think Social Pinpoint has this capability that you can kind of hyperlink things within it. So you can bring it back if you define neighborhood center. You can bring it back like by clicking on the link in the question. You can, what was the neighborhood center? I know I read it in the background, but where is it? Just to make it that much easier, because the only comment I'm going to make on this is that you're very aggressive in wanting the amount of questions answered in a single survey. My thinking is you're going to have a significant drop-off rate by length. So I would get somebody to do it that you don't know and time it. But what I found in my work that anything more than 10 minutes, you start to get drop-off. And at 15 minutes, it's a significant drop-off. And the other thing we've noted that if it's a real problem every time that you do it, then people won't do your survey in the future because they're not going to invest 25 minutes or 30 minutes of time to do a town survey. So I would scale, like, are any of the questions you can kind of condense and make into kind of one question? Do I really need to ask that question? So just go through it and see it, or could this survey be 2 or 4 surveys, depending on the data that you need? Because the problem is you lose by rep, right? Oh my God, it's a town survey. It's going to be a 30-minute investment. I really want to do it, but I don't have 30 minutes. So just manage expectations a little bit, I think, and break it down. I think you'd have much better off getting probably a quarter of these questions out and get feedback, because everybody's busy and doing stuff. But that's my only thoughts. Go ahead.
I haven't got very much to say, but I've visited cities where you do have 6-story, 10-story buildings down both sides of the road, the canyon, and they're not very nice places to visit. They're terrible places to live in. And I think that's going to be a concern with people. Is there a way to appease that concern? Would council be able to restrict the number of multiple units in a row? Once you do a zone area, does that mean that anybody can come along, developer can say, I'm going to build? Because I believe that we are going to get built out. I think when this 2011 plan was done, I bet you they had no idea what it would look like in 2025. And I think there's going to be enough Americans move up here. They're going to fill up everything we got the way they're going. But there is a very strong possibility. If you allow it to be built, it's going to be built inside the next 20 years. And what do you want it to look like? And people are going to be concerned. And is there a way to say, at council's discretion, as far as the number of, I don't know, there should be a way to alleviate some of the concerns that will be.
No, you bring up a great point on how you mitigate that. And somebody brought up to me, well, it's going to look like Vancouver Street if it's built out, you know, all those 4 to 6 story on old Vancouver Street, they're older apartment buildings now. And the difference is they're not going to build like that anymore. Right? It's going to be built. There's not going to be a lawn in front that's, you know, that's because the land's too expensive. Nobody can afford to do that. It's going to be pretty much right to the curb or right to the sidewalk and straight up. I think some of council's concerns about mitigating is how do we increase the setback? How do we protect trees that kind of define View Royal? And how do we like shelter it not only from the roadway and looking back, but we've got problems with stratas bitching at other stratas because there's not enough setback, right? They're overlooking each other. So there's that challenge as well. And it's real. And people live at it every day. So how do we create, is there mitigations that we could do? I'm not so sure, but Leanne, you might have some thought.
Yeah, through development permit areas and strong design guidelines. And it's important to note that the official community plan is policy. And so we're saying like up to 6 stories. It doesn't someone could build a 4-story, someone could build a 3, you know, if it's up to 6 stories, obviously there's policy to support that, and depending on where the community wants to see more mixed use development and things like that, and how to make mixed use development viable. But again, zoning. So zoning is where we'll be able to is the tool that will sort of dictate in terms of the max height and the setbacks and things like that, as well as having strong design guidelines as well when we get an application in.
But specifically in the way we do our areas for land use planning, there's no way, because we are doing it like a blob, there's no way to say or can we, the corner of this block in this lot can be a 6-story building. For the next little run, it's going to be townhouses or small scale multi-unit housing, and then at the next intersection we can build that. Are we able to do that
Through the OCP? Yes, those are land use designations in the OCP, and so those yeah, so that's the feedback that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because I think it's hard for people to visualize a blob, but easier for them to realize that's the lot on that corner they're talking about to build that thing. Go ahead, feedback on survey.
Yeah, I'm going to respond to the last comments too. Just as a reflection, I have lived in places with 6 stories, and they're some of the best places I've ever lived, with probably the strongest communities I've ever lived in. Like, I don't think the type of building necessarily changes the community for the negative, especially larger density. It can make a huge impact on community, especially when you don't have to. For instance, I needed to buy coffee beans this morning, and because we have pretty much 0 retail in View Royal, I drove 12 minutes to go buy coffee beans because I had to go to Colwood to do it. So I think there are improvements that can be made to community, especially by increasing density. It's not like small means tighter knit. The other thing, as a reflection on the last comments, is that it doesn't seem like our current land use is protecting trees today. If I look at the buildings that are going in, we're taking out a lot of trees to put in buildings that have ideally people living in them, but also don't have any retail in them either. So I don't think the things that we're proposing have an impact on the ability for us to protect trees, but I think maybe our OCP and our process and maybe design guidelines would have that. Maybe we can require that as part of it. I don't need a response, that's just a thought. On the survey itself, I actually really like the survey. I took it before this meeting. It took me maybe 12 minutes, I think. I did it on my phone, and it was great. I actually really liked the questions in it too. I thought they were quite clear. I had the exact same feeling that Mike did, which is there were several points in the survey where I was like, what is this? Where is this? And I was able to jump back and forth between sections, but I'm also a software developer. Like, I build these things for a living, and it was still tricky for me. So I would say, like, bringing some of those definitions and especially locations and purposes into the questions would be, I think, really nice. And I don't think it would add to the length of the survey. It just is something you can scroll through if you already know it. If you don't, then you can refer to it. The scenarios themselves, I had the same, I think it was Aaron made this comment, but I answered the scenario questions as if I was responding to whether I liked the scenario or not. But I think they were actually asking me, like, if this scenario was picked, how would you feel about these uses? And so I think it might actually be better to invert the question, where you ask which scenario is preferred first, and then propose the next questions as, suppose this scenario was selected for development, like, how would you support this use? Because otherwise, I think you're basically just going to get people saying, I don't support it for every scenario they don't support. But let's say I prefer scenario 1, but scenario 3 is selected. I might still have some positive opinions about things that would happen in there. And then I have a thing that I would just like to ask for as well, which is it possible in our design guidelines to mandate ground floor retail in our multi-story developments along the corridors and neighborhoods?
That would be through zoning that we would we would do that, yeah. And it has been something that's been brought forward by council as well.
Nice, thank you.
That was a good point that you brought up about going to Colwood, because without that zoning of bottom floor commercial, you'd still have to drive to Colwood if it was all 6-story residential. So yeah, I think that's the trade-off for services. And when I say commercial, just so everybody knows, could be a daycare, could be a clinic, could be a coffee shop, but just some space for that would serve the community as opposed to 6 stories. Input.
You guys have, I think, summarized it really well. Overall, I really like the survey. I thought you guys did a good job. There are some definitions that I think would be helpful, just like what everyone else has said. And I also strongly agree with Kyle about the scenario situation. Slightly confusing when I was answering some questions, but as a whole, I think it's pretty close. So.
Thank you. Save the best for last. Judy, go ahead.
I really agreed with a lot of what Kyle said. I did the survey. And I'm not, you know, I've learned to do this. When I saw it was 18 pages, I laid down my head on the keyboard and I thought, oh my God, can I do this? And when it comes out, can my 82-year-old husband do this? I'm taking this home so he can read some of it. But I don't see how you can shorten it because there was so much information there. I couldn't see any other way to do it. And I took probably 10 to 15 minutes to do it. I am concerned about survey fatigue. Neighbors that I've talked to when the second survey came out said, oh my God, don't talk to me. I did the first survey and I really, I'm a bit cautious about introducing a third survey to people who don't, you know, aren't really into it, but they're trying to do the right thing. I think the pop-ups in that are really important because you can kind of drag people through things that way. But I don't, the survey was fine. It was just so much information. I just don't know, but I could not see where you could shorten it. Okay.
Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, thanks, Judy, for those questions. I did receive comments from Kim Abraham, and I told her that I would share them with the group tonight. So if you can just let me pull up her email and
Yes, please.
I will share those with you all. So Kim Abraham's comments are, so for TOA, she recommends spell out in each question, as sometimes public are not familiar with acronyms. And her second comment is the description with photos of proposed designs. I found it was too long. Urban center, hospital transit-oriented area, etc. Can you use the word description that is on page 232 to 235 on urban systems memo, page 1314? I know what she means. Yeah, so looking, I guess, you know, building on what you were saying, Judy, it sounds like Kim had some similar comments in terms of just the descriptions and the length of some of the descriptions. So thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. I think we've got everybody's input. Are you full up there, Sterling, now with input?
Yeah, this is all great. Thank you, Mayor Tobias. There's yeah, a lot of you know, time and effort went into this, but it's always good to hear from an outside perspective. It's you get kind of in the weeds a little bit when you're working on this, and it's good to hear from those that have actually completed the survey and hear from people that are not working on this in the office setting. So appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, we've got a saying in the office is that there's no one right way to do a survey, but there are all kinds of ways to do a wrong survey. So I don't know if that helps at all. It doesn't help me. I think we've got, if you're happy with where we're at there, we can go to the next item, and that is one item for correspondence. Normally for correspondence when it comes up. If somebody wants to talk about that, that's fine, but somebody generally raises a motion to receive it if everybody's read it, and that is Mr. Wilson's letter, and it is on 316 to 318 of your pack.
Mayor Tobias, sorry, we also received a late letter from Jane Devonshire, which was added to the late agenda item, which is also an addendum to the main package as well. So I just wanted to flag that for you.
Okay, I'm not seeing it on the agenda online, is it?
Yeah, there's another link there for late agenda items, and it's in that package.
Okay, there's Jane's at the end on the link online at the end of it. Okay, so we could probably handle both items of correspondence. The one from Jane Devonshire and Doug Wilson. Anybody want to raise any comments about either of those? Seeing no comments, can I get a motion for the committee to receive both correspondence? Moved by Mike. Seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion carries for receive the correspondence emails from Jane Devonshire and Doug Wilson. And the report that was the late agenda item, was that what you put forth initially, or? Yeah, it was. Okay. So I think we're just down, correct me if I'm wrong, Leanne, just to new business, and I had a bunch of questions, some of which understandably we've already answered. And they were on page 319. So I had asked in question 1, and I asked these questions because I think it helps council out understand others' perspectives of the committee. So 1, is the current mandatory zoning adequate for the town you want to see in 20 years? I think Aaron had brought that up and said, no, we want to see option 3. And the majority of us agreed with that with some reservations. Does the committee recommend that we include a corridor densification plan with the mandatory rezoning? And I think, again, that was part of Aaron's one for the third option. And the majority of us agreed for different reasons, likely, and disagreed for some too. If we recommend a further densification on the corridors, are there services required for the density, such as commercial space? And I think you brought that up as well, but I'd love to be able to codify that. Are we saying that if we like the densification model of 6 stories up Old Island Highway, that they come with services or commercial space on the ground floor as part of that provision? Is that what we're saying? We don't need to vote on that.
I believe that's what we're saying. Is, the mixed use developments make the most sense in terms of providing services for people who are living close by, which is one of the goals. And
I'm always cautious when I hear mixed use, because mixed use could mean an apartment building with nothing in it.
The mixed use that I'm talking about is to have residential floors above doctor's offices or physio offices or dentists or restaurants or.
Is there a
organs.
word for that, Leanne?
Mixed use.
But we've approved mixed use that hasn't included that. Okay, so that is
Anyways.
mixed use.
pardon me, sorry, I don't think I had my mic on, so,
No, can
yeah.
you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Leah. What I said was, mixed use is typically defined as ground floor commercial with residential above.
Okay, so that's what we're saying. Yeah. Okay, so I think the committee's in agreement with that. Okay, the next one is, I think is important.
Sorry, Mayor Tobias.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it's possible to expand on the definition at all, but I think that like the community thrives on third spaces. Like that's the thing that makes it work. And like I think you could probably define those into the OCP in a way that we could say maybe we require them in a certain zone. And that's like, you know, that's parks, that's community centers, that's restaurants, coffee shops, that's places where people can convene. I think it would be too bad if we had just residential apartment blocks down Old Island Highway with nothing for anyone to go to.
And I think some of the concern leads into my next question is that a lot of developers, rightly so, don't want to give that first floor away, right? They'd like it all to be residential because it's easy. And some of them, the way they develop, they just develop residential. They don't touch. It's just what they do, right? You get other ones like, was it Omnicron that built Eagle Creek that does a bit of everything, kind of makes it put together, but not everybody develops the same way. So sometimes it's a hard sell is what I'm saying. And sometimes if there are adequate services nearby, they will push for that density because, hey, there's a grocery store across the street. There's a restaurant there. Why do we need to incorporate that into our building? So my question is, and it pertains to the corridor and the town center, and it's question number 4. The town center has been designated in that same area now as is defined by Fort Victoria RV Park. And I brought this up a while ago that it's been designated for 14 years by the last OCP. In discussing with the family, there's no intent to sell that whole property as it is right now. The other implication it has, even though we could be zoned up to 6 stories, because we're next to the town center designation, give us 3 more stories because, hey, we're close to it. So I guess my question to you is that an area we want to pursue as a town center? You don't have to speak for everybody. You just have to speak for yourself. And I'd love to go around the room for that. Or is there someplace else that might make more sense as a town center? Mike, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, right. I would say no. There's no reason to continue that the goal from the 2011 OCP. It hasn't happened, and it's not likely to happen. And it's an artificial construct rather than something that grows more organically, like the neighborhood zones that we've been talking about.
I think like geographically, I understand why it makes sense. I guess like my question is, what's the downside of leaving it in as a potential town center? We're developing out these other areas, you know, like Eagle Creek's been developed out and Admiral's Walk's been developed out. There's no greenfield to choose from, and we could designate Eagle Creek the town center, but will it change anything? If they one day something happens and they decide to sell, what happens? Will it become a subdivision of single family homes if we don't designate it a town center? Like what's the downside?
Could be anything that whoever buys it wants it to do. Of course, you know, in order to develop it on something that wasn't part of the OCP, they would need an amendment to the OCP in order to do it. Did I get that right, Leanne?
That is correct, but I think in some ways, I think Councillor Lemon provided a bit of history at an early meeting earlier on in terms of why, you know, that site was sort of identified as the town center because of the rail corridor and things like that. I think a lot of it is just sort of the name of it. So I think, like, for example, the land use scenario option 1, I believe, identifies it as a corridor, which essentially supports similar land uses that the current town center designation supports. And then another land use scenario, it's identified as a neighborhood village, which is sort of similar, but we changed the name from town center to corridor or town center to, I'm saying we haven't like it's proposed. So proposing either corridor or proposing a neighborhood village, but essentially similar, mixed use development and slightly higher density than single family dwellings and yeah.
Okay, I guess in that case, I would say keep it as a town center. It doesn't seem to me to change anything. And I think logically, if it ever went to for sale, you would want to create something there that was be sizable and service the town based on where it is.
Jerry?
Because it's possible, although it hasn't happened, but because it's possible that we will get something moving on that corridor. I think that would change, to do what Erin said, keeping it as a town center continues to make sense. And I'm also thinking of Mr. Plaster, one of the owners, sent a letter to an earlier meeting in which he was suggesting that half of it be considered for some kind of mixed use, commercial, et cetera.
That was the half of it next to the railway that is very encumbered with other electrical.
Or was it the back half? I thought it
Yeah.
was the front half. It's the front half? Yeah. So the back half remaining as camping. So the back half can remain as camping. But we can still keep the town center designation. And perhaps in time, the Plasters will want to sell and some form of a neighborhood center, neighborhood village could take place there.
You're saying different things though, Jerry.
No,
You're saying neighborhood center,
I'm
and
saying
town center. So which one?
No, I'm saying we could keep it as town center.
Okay.
But the components of a town center, some of the components, perhaps on a smaller scale, could go into the half that they might be ready to sell or develop, while the rest, they could allow camping until such time that is sold and that could develop up.
Perfect.
So keep
Yeah.
it.
Okay. That's
Is there any legal right to a town, the term town center? Does that mean that they couldn't sell it for somebody else, for some other use? Is it a zoning?
no, it's zoned right now
It's
in
just
our.
a wish on the wish list.
It's zone campground,
Yeah.
right? So it's not zoned as, but within the OCP, it is designated as a town center.
Same as urban center.
No, and that's where pictures are worth 1,000 words. So I think there's, you've got a town center in the pictures, maybe not. Yeah,
So town center is not a designation. In the draft land use scenarios that were prepared, it's we sort of got based on some, earlier feedback from council. We got sort of rid of the town center designation, but the land use, as I noted earlier, the land use scenarios identify those lands as either a corridor or a neighborhood village. But if you look at those land use, if you read the descriptions of those land use designations, it's very similar to a town center. It's just has a different name, basically.
okay, I think the picture is important for a town center. In modern terms, when I Google town center, it brings me to Uptown, right? For density in a modern sense of a town center. That is, but we've got to define words that other people can understand, Jerry. If we say town center, everybody's got a different vision in their mind of what that looks like, right? Neighborhood center, obviously less neighborhood center in my mind was a post office and a country grocer or whatever. That sometimes they were the same building. But yeah, we just got to be clear on what we mean by neighborhood center.
Well, perhaps neighborhood center is
More appropriate.
more appropriate. And there's a neighborhood, we have a neighborhood village designation. Now, is that a little bit more fulsome than a neighborhood center?
Yeah, I'll have to pull up the neighborhood village this is a proposed new our current OCP does not have neighborhood village, so this would be a new name for a designation, which would essentially allow support mixed use development up to 6 stories.
Okay, and all that could go into a village, like services and commercial. et
Absolutely,
cetera.
amenities.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that then.
Okay. And in any of the options, Leanne, are we referring to a town center? So we're not. So we don't need to explore town center anymore. I think my next question was about co-op housing and market rental. So we don't have to deal with that. There was one that's coming up for, I put a link into the thing that you can see online, and it's 2 Hospital Way. It is a gravel pit, essentially opposite the hospital. It's in the transit-oriented area right now. It's up to 10 stories. It's owned by a Victoria company, West Hills, that have, of course, done a lot of work in Langford. They've already got some conceptual drawings there. My thinking is that whether we want it or not, we could have a town center, right? Especially with its proximity to Eagle Creek. And it's got density of at least 10 stories with the legislation. And a plan to put in the services kind of that would be required for that area, as well as lab space to support the hospital and their clinical offices and whatnot. So my thinking is even by default, we may have a town center, right? That has the density, the transportation, the everything there. But I wanted to see how folks thought about that, because technically we have 2 kind of town centers now without planning for them. I think it's Admiral's Walk and Eagle Creek, whether we like it or not, that's what happened. But I was wondering how the committee felt about if that area was developed to that level, would that be a town center? Not necessarily the or only, but a town center then.
I think the question I have about this town center designation is, does it have any functional meaning if we, does it matter if we define anything as a town center? If it doesn't mean anything beyond corridor or neighborhood village? We don't need to designate that area a town center or the RV park a town center if it doesn't mean anything. So maybe it's moot. But if there is a meaning, I think this is the question we had last time, was if there is a meaning to town center, we aren't going to build a new community center in View Royal because we don't have the space that it would go, which is that town center space, then that seems like a problem. But if that's not a problem, then I don't think we need to designate it at all.
I think the vision of a town center is we can define in the OCP, right? That's what matters to us. If there are services like a community center that would go in there, I mean, we've got 2 community centers now that aren't built in the century, both of them, and and we've added 3 times the population since they were even conceived as being kind of community centers. One's arguably a house. So there are other things that we could put on there, but does the committee believe that there's things that should go into it? Should we explore what a town center is and what it could provide the town for services? Or do we just drop it? It was in the OCP. The only reason I want to bring this up in discussion, it was in the OCP for 14 years to have a town center. And now we're not pursuing a town center. Are we missing something? Or are we okay to just let it drop? Mike.
Just want to speak again on this. I bet dollars to donuts that the people that are living at Fort Victoria, by and large, are not campers. Those are their homes. So just because they don't have basements doesn't mean they're less valid than those that do. And they are people who live and work in this community, and it's affordable for them. And therefore, we shouldn't be presumptuous and think, well, they're just campers, they can go somewhere else. And my concern about maintaining that designation as a town center, it kind of might pull the rug out from underneath them, and somebody would come in to change all that. And so if you're an advocate for co-op housing, then I think that kind of housing that is there at Fort Victoria is just as valid. Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't think it actually makes sense to designate Fort Victoria as the town center anymore. I think it could make a good town center, but if they have no intention of selling it and there's really no functional purpose of defining it, the only thing that I foresee is it increasing the value of the land, which would not benefit anybody, because when you increase the value of land, the developers come in, they have to build worse things to make more money. So ultimately, I don't see why we would define something that we have no way of getting in any kind of way. However, I think you could develop around that area, and then if that space ever became available, blend it in, and that could be quite nice. I mean, we have a corridor right there that is already starting to develop. It definitely needs more things, but it also extends almost all the way to here. I mean, it's not the most walkable, but I think if we developed this particular corridor and Fort Victoria ever became available, we could blend it in to be, something a little bit more inclusive. But yeah, I don't see why we would define that.
No, thanks. Value your feedback. Judy.
I think we should let the town center thing go. I think a town center is something that evolves, as it appears to be evolving in Eagle Creek, but it may not. We biked by there last week, and I really took note of those huge power lines coming in. And I thought to myself, I'm surprised that there's residents underneath those power lines. And I think if they ever stop making that with the trailers there's going to be no way that houses can be built under those power lines, or even a certain area, because they're very powerful ones. And then there's the big box that's there as well. And then the other thing is, where's your access? Are we going to try and get access off the highway? Their access is one way in, and there's people living there. They're permanent residents. They're living there now. There's a handful of campers. I find it interesting that it's zoned campground, because it's not a campground. And because there's rules about campgrounds that you can only camp for X number of months a year. And you hear about that coming up all the time. So, but I just think a town center will evolve where it's meant to evolve. Yeah. So, okay.
Thanks, Judy. No, all good points, and I take them in. And so what we're saying now is that there's no scenario going forward with a town center in it, that we really don't need to define a town center. We could define those services as they come up that designate those. So we don't need a town center specifically. And the other one that I got into was the three options. Mine were a little bit different for growth, and I guess the difference was option 3, which is legislative compliance with a Western Gateway focus, to develop that area out there. I think that the committee's already made its intent that it wants to do the balanced growth with the corridors, and that's fine. So thank you for your input. Did anybody else have any questions that they would have to the committee, or anything for me or Leanne before we close out? Leanne, is there anything I'm missing?
No, it's great.
Okay, great. So now we need a motion to terminate. Okay, wait. Seconder. Everybody seconds. All in favor of termination. Thanks a lot, folks. Really valuable for me.
Thank you.